The cardiologist's office smelled like recycled air and cold coffee, and I was sitting in a plastic chair when the billing coordinator told me my treatment program might have to pause. $1,950. That's what stood between me and the cardiac monitoring protocol Dr. Nguyen said I needed. Medicare covered 80%. It always covers 80%, which sounds generous until you're doing the math on the rest. The remote cardiac event monitor, the adjusted medication tier, the follow-up blood work that my supplemental plan had decided didn't qualify under my specific coverage tier. In $950 due in 10 days, or they'd pause the monitoring and I'd be managing my heart failure the old way, waiting and hoping. I called my son. He was in Atlanta where he'd been for 12 years, a litigation partner at a firm I couldn't have afforded to hire for a parking dispute. He answered on the second ring, his voice already moving fast, already somewhere else. I could hear the murmur of an office behind him, keyboards, the low hum of a building full of people making money. Dad, hold on. I held on. I'd spent 35 years in middle school. Patience is something that work teaches you whether you want it or not. When he came back, he sounded clipped. What's up? I told him. Congestive heart failure, 14 months of managing it, the monitoring gap the insurance company had decided was my problem. The $1,950 I didn't have sitting liquid. My pension covered the house payment and utilities. My savings had been bled slow and steady, over 2 years of copays and deductibles, and all the small costs that add up around a body that's forgetting how to regulate itself. There was a pause. Dad, listen, the Davenport settlement just closed, $8.2 million. You probably saw it in the news. He'd sent me the link. I had. But those are client funds in our trust account. I can't touch that. It's an ethics rule, not a choice. I could lose my license. I knew what a trust account was. I'd help pay for the education that explained it to him. What about your personal account, son? Another pause, longer. In the background, a woman's voice, his wife, smooth and certain. Corbin, the Hendersons are in the conference room. Everything's tied up right now, Dad. Investments, the beach house refinance, it's just not a good time. Can we talk next week? I'll see what I can move around. Next week. Corbin. Thursday, I promise. The line went dead. I sat in the parking garage beneath Dr. Nguyen's building for 22 minutes with the engine off, the concrete ceiling gray above me. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. An apology through the phone, a callback, something. Then my daughter called. She'd found out through my neighbor, who'd heard me on the phone through the kitchen window, who'd told her friend, who'd told my daughter's coworker. That's how information moves in Dayton. Not through channels, through people who still care enough to pass things along. Daddy. Her voice was quieter than his. Always has been. I heard, come home, I have something for you. Hello, and welcome. Before I go any further, thank you for being here. If these stories have meant something to you, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing them. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing who's with me. A quick note. What you're about to hear blends real experiences with some fictional details, shaped for the purpose of sharing a truth I believe is worth your time. Any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. But the lesson at the center of this, I promise you, that part is real. My daughter lived 20 minutes from me, in a 2-bedroom apartment off Springboro Pike, with yellow curtains she'd hung herself, and a kitchen that always smelled like something on the stove. The kind of job that pays you just enough to keep doing it. Not enough to stop worrying. 6 years she'd been doing it, ever since her daughter's father decided fatherhood was more than he'd agreed to. Her daughter was 6 years old, bright-eyed, gap-toothed, absolutely certain her grandfather could fix anything. When I pulled into the parking lot, she was already on the porch in her work uniform, lanyard still around her neck. She'd come straight from a shift. Come inside, Daddy, you look cold. I told her I was fine. She told me to come inside anyway. On the kitchen table was a mason jar, one of the old ball jars her mother used to use for canning. Inside it, folded bills, 1s, 5s, 10s, a handful of 20s packed in tight. I put in every extra shift for 4 months, she said. Weekend doubles, holiday hours, whatever family's left on the counter as a tip when I'd done a good day. She pushed the jar toward me. It's $870. I know it's not all of it, but it's yours. I looked at the jar, at her hands, at the lanyard still around her neck from somebody else's house, somebody else's afternoon. You can't give me your savings, I said. You told me something a long time ago, she said. Her eyes were steady, not performing anything, just certain. You said family doesn't calculate, family just shows up. She slid the jar the rest of the way across the table. I held it, and I didn't say anything for a while, because some moments don't need words pushed into them. The next morning, Ralph Givens showed up at my door with a thermos of bad coffee and a look on his face I recognized from 30 years of working beside him. Ralph had been my vice principal at Jefferson Middle School for the last 14 years of my tenure. Before that, my department chair. Before that, a first-year history teacher I'd given a classroom to when nobody else wanted that wing of the building. We'd seen children grow up. We'd called parents with news they didn't want. We'd stayed in that building until 9 o'clock at night, more times than either of us would ever bother to count. He came inside without being invited the way old friends do. "I made some calls," he said. "Ralph, just listen." He sat down across from me. "You ran that school for 12 years. You bought notebook paper for kids whose families couldn't cover it. You were there on Saturday mornings for students whose parents worked doubles. You stayed for 35 years in a building that ate younger people alive." He set an envelope on the table. "Former teachers, custodial staff, a couple of parents from the old PTA who still get together on the third Thursday. It's $820. No strings. Don't argue with me." I wanted to. That reflex, the pride that made me wait too long to ask for anything ever, rose up the way it always did. "There's a difference," Ralph said before I could speak, "between charity and brotherhood. You ought to know that by now." I picked up the envelope. $870 from my daughter. $800 from the people I'd worked beside for 3 decades. $690 total. Still $206 short of what I needed, but for the first time since I'd left that billing office, I didn't feel like I was facing it alone. Then the letter arrived. Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation, official seal, signature required. I stood on my front porch in November cold and signed for it. The mail carrier watched me, with the particular stillness of someone who can tell they've delivered something heavy. In 2004, I'd torn my left rotator cuff, breaking up a hallway altercation between 2 7th graders who collided into me hard enough to drive my shoulder into the cinder block wall. The school district's risk management office denied my workers' comp claim. They said the injury wasn't documented within the required window. I appealed. They denied it again. I went back to work with my arm in a compression sleeve and taught through it, and eventually, I just stopped talking about it. The way you stop talking about things that nobody official wants to hear. I taught 16 more years on that shoulder. The letter informed me that the state of Ohio had completed a comprehensive audit of improperly denied educator workers' compensation claims filed between 2000 and 2008. My case had been flagged for independent review. The panel found that my claim had been improperly denied. The injury met the criteria for a partial permanent disability benefit, and that back pay had been owed to me for 20 years. Enclosed was a check, $29,400. I sat down at my kitchen table with the check in my hands, the mason jar still where my daughter had left it, Ralph's envelope beside it, and I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. I no longer needed my son's help. I was free. And the moment I understood that, something else followed close behind it. Colder, because a man with $29,400 and a son who has lied to him has options he didn't have before. I called Rex Carver that afternoon. Rex had been a property attorney in Dayton for 30 years, a friend since we'd coached Little League together in the 90s, the kind of man who thought carefully before he spoke and never said anything he didn't mean. I told him everything. Corbin's excuse about the trust account, the beach house I hadn't known about, the timing of it all. Rex was quiet for a moment. "Let me look into a few things," he said. He called back in 8 days. "Amos." His voice was careful, measured, the way a man sounds when he's carrying something he wishes he didn't have to hand over. "Your son was not telling you the truth." I'd known. But hearing it stated plainly in the clear light of a Wednesday morning was a different thing from suspecting it. Corbin's personal investment accounts held a combined balance over $310,000. Liquid. Accessible. The Hilton Head property, purchased outright 22 months ago. The trust account argument was technically accurate and entirely irrelevant. Client funds and personal funds are completely separate under bar rules. He could have written me a personal check that same afternoon without touching an ethics rule. He'd known that when he said it. He chose not to. But that wasn't the worst of it. Rex had found a home equity line of credit opened against my house in 2019. I had not opened it. The application had been submitted using a power of attorney document bearing my signature, a signature I had not written. $43,000 had been drawn against my home equity and deposited into an LLC I had never heard of. The LLC dissolved 8 months later. Rex's voice was careful as he read me the Ohio statute number for elder financial abuse, felony level. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. Maybe I'd spent all my shock sitting in a parking garage in October. Is there more? I asked. There was more. In the fall of 2021, $21,000 had been withdrawn from my 403(b), the retirement account I'd been contributing to for 30 years on a teacher's salary. The withdrawal had been processed using a PIN I'd shared with Corbin once. In 2018, when I was recovering from knee surgery and needed someone I trusted to handle a payment. He'd told me at the time he'd used $3,000 for a bill. I believed him. The $21,000 had not gone toward anything of mine. My daughter had never seen a dollar of it, though Corbin had told me, in a passing phone call the following year, that he'd help cover some of her expenses. I had 2 children. One had emptied a mason jar for me. The other had helped himself to my retirement and called it generosity. Before I tell you what came next, type 7 in the comments if you're still with me. And one more reminder, the following events include some fictionalized elements for purposes of clarity and privacy, but the truth underneath them is real. I spent 3 days thinking about what I actually wanted, not what I had the right to do. Rex was already clear on that. I thought about what justice looked like, whether it looked like destruction or something harder. I thought about Corbin, at 11, sitting straight-backed in the front row of the assembly, where they announced my vice principal appointment, wearing the clip-on tie his mother had fixed twice that morning. I thought about the 12-hour round trips to Columbus for his LSAT prep, twice a month for a year. I thought about my daughter at 17, coming home from her shift at the grocery store, to find me asleep at the kitchen table over student files, and setting a plate of food next to me without waking me. Same father, same house, 2 completely different understandings of what you owe the people who raised you. I called Ralph. I need Jefferson Middle, I said, the gymnasium, 2 weeks from Friday, 7 o'clock. He didn't ask why. He said, I'll make sure everyone comes. Rex sent Corbin a formal letter on firm letterhead, which has a certain weight a phone call doesn't. It informed him that his father needed to discuss estate planning matters and the future management of certain shared financial instruments, and that his presence at Jefferson Middle School Gymnasium on the 14th at 7 p.m. was required. Worded carefully enough that he couldn't claim confusion, open enough that he didn't know yet what he was walking into. He called me twice after the letter arrived. I didn't pick up. The gymnasium at Jefferson still had the cracked bleacher on the east wall I'd been meaning to repair since 2014. By 10 minutes to 7, nearly every folding chair was filled. Ralph was there. 43 teachers, aides, custodians, cafeteria workers, people who'd spent their working years in those hallways beside me. 3 members of the old PTA board, former students now in their 20s and 30s who'd heard and come anyway. A woman named Deirdre, who'd been in my 8th grade class 28 years ago and had sent me a Christmas card every year, since the year I'd helped her navigate a mid-semester school transfer when her family had nowhere else to turn. My daughter sat in the second row. Her daughter sat beside her, coloring quietly in a spiral notebook. Rex sat at the table I'd set up at the front. Corbin walked in at 7:04. Suit, of course. He stopped 3 steps inside the door and looked at the room the way a man looks when the floor is moved without warning. His eyes found me, then the crowd, then me again. Dad, his voice was low. What is this? Sit down, son. He sat. I didn't raise my voice. 35 years in middle school teaches you that the quieter you are, the more a room listens. I told them everything. The billing office, the $1,950, the phone call, the trust account excuse. I told them that while I was counting money from a mason jar, my daughter had filled from 4 months of weekend home health shifts. My son had over $310,000 sitting in personal investment accounts. Nobody moved. Then Rex spoke. He read from the documents. The home equity line, the power of attorney bearing a signature that wasn't mine, the $21,000 from my retirement account, the dissolved LLC, the dates. Corbin's face had gone the color of a man watching the structure of a long lie fall in sequence, floor by floor. Deirdre said from the third row quietly, Mr. Hollis didn't take a sick day in 30 years. A few heads nodded. Ralph said, he covered supplies for kids out of his own pocket and never told a soul. My daughter didn't say anything. She sat in her home health aide lanyard in the second row, next to her daughter, who was still coloring in her notebook. And that image said everything that needed to be said. I stood up. I have 2 options for you, Corbin. I want you to hear them in front of these people, because they deserve to witness whatever you choose. He looked at his hands. Option 1, you repay what you took. The full $43,000 from the home equity line and the $2,100 from my retirement account. You establish a scholarship fund in your mother's name at this school. $50,000 to start, $10,000 a year going forward for first-generation students who need it. You sign a notarized agreement surrendering any claim to act on my behalf in any financial matter ever again. I paused. And you apologize to your sister, not to me, to her. The gymnasium was completely still. Option 2. Rex files the bar complaint in the morning. The criminal referral for elder financial abuse goes to the Montgomery County prosecutor by end of week. The civil suit follows. All of it becomes public record, and your firm hears about it through the news. A long silence. You have until tomorrow morning, I said. Tonight, go home and think about who you want to be. Corbin stood and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped, his back to the room, his hand on the frame. I remember every debate match you drove to, he said. His voice was broken in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was small. Even the ones in Columbus. I know, I said. He walked out into the dark. He called at 6:15 the next morning. Option 1, he said, all of it. 3 weeks later, he sat in Rex's office and signed every document. The repayment arrangement, the scholarship fund, named for his mother, Alma Hollis, who had died 8 years ago still believing the best of her son, and who I hoped had been at least partly right. The notarized agreement, he signed them all. Before he left, he walked to where my daughter was seated in the waiting room. He stood in front of her for a moment. I told Dad the retirement money went to help you, he said. That was a lie. I'm sorry, Della. I'm sorry for everything. She looked at him the way you look at someone you've spent years adjusting your expectations of. Don't do it again, she said, to him or to anyone. That was all. The Alma Hollis Memorial Scholarship issued its first award in the spring. $3,000 to a 9th grader at Jefferson, first in his family to apply to a 4-year university, working part-time at a gas station, the kind of student I would have known by name on the first morning of school. His acceptance letter to Ohio State arrived in April. Ralph called me when he heard. He laughed the way old men laugh when something finally goes right. My daughter used her first December paycheck to catch up on 3 months of back rent she'd been stretching since summer. I tried to return the $870 from the mason jar. She pushed it back across the table and said, "That was never about the money, Daddy." I know. I've always known. Corbin came to Dayton in March, alone, no briefcase. He sat in my kitchen and drank bad coffee and didn't try to explain anything. He asked how my heart was holding up. I told him stable for now. He asked if he could come back in the summer. I said I'd think about it. That's not forgiveness. It's not rejection either. It's just the truth. Some things take longer than a season to repair, and rushing them breaks them worse than the original wound did. My cardiologist told me in February that the monitoring program was showing a steadier rhythm. Not cured, my heart won't be cured, but managed, sustainable, the kind of outcome you call good when you've stopped asking for perfect. I still go to Ralph's on Tuesday evenings. We drink bad coffee and argue about Ohio State, and talk about the students who have become people we'd be proud to know. There's a photograph on his wall. The Jefferson staff from 2017, the year we hit adequate yearly progress for the first time in a decade. I'm in the back row with my arm around Ralph, both of us squinting into the late afternoon sun. Some mornings I sit in my car outside Jefferson Middle and look at the building. 35 years went through those doors. I know which hallway gets cold in January, which stairwell the kids always tried to race even after 1,000 reminders, which cafeteria workers stayed late every Friday to make sure the free lunch count was right so no child would know they were being counted. I know what it means to show up somewhere, year after year, and build something that doesn't fit in an investment account. My daughter calls every evening around 6. We talk about her day, which clients she visited, what her daughter said at school, what's on the stove. Some evenings we don't talk about much. We just stay on the line. That, I have come to understand, is the whole of it. Not the accounts, not the letters with official seals, not even the check that arrived on the right day from a state agency 20 years too late. It's the people who stay on the line when there's nothing particular to say, because staying is exactly the point. Because some people understand, without being told, that love isn't what you declare in the easy moments. It's what you do with the hard ones. I handed out a lot of advice in 35 years of hallways. Some of it was even worth keeping. But the truest thing I know I didn't learn in a classroom. I learned it from a mason jar on a kitchen table, from an envelope passed across without ceremony, From a little girl who kept coloring quietly in her notebook while her grandfather's world arranged itself around her. Steady and unhurried, the way children are before the world teaches them otherwise. Family is not who you were born to. Family is who shows up and stays.